There it is. Well, good morning again, everybody. This is the seventh book club. I really couldn't believe it when I typed it out. I put five and I was like, that is not right. And then I almost put six. Nope, seven. So thank you all for joining for such a sustained period of time and again for your interest here. We're covering the second half of part three in the manuscript here, and this is really, I mean, I don't want to say I have a favorite part, but like this is the just most intriguing part, I think, in the whole thing. So excited to hear your thoughts. Really getting into everything that's going on in the Cook County Jail in 1966 and 67 and 68, which comes from directly from the tape. Really is where I'm getting a lot of these details, and then so that direct conversation between John Shields and Martin Tajra, and then from John Shields's interview with the family as well in 1983, among other sources. So certainly, I think in a lot of aspects in this second half of part three, I'm taking some narrative liberties. So if there's any points that you guys are like, where'd you get that? It could be that I'm sort of making dialogue into the parts in which we know what happened, but not exactly what was said. So all that being said, starting off in Tier E1 in the Cook County Jail, where Joseph DiArgento and Martin Tajra are cellmates, and Martin Tajra, and kind of we've already covered that sort of concept of what a barn boss is, but a barn boss being the sort of most vicious criminals with the most vicious pasts are sort of in the top of the hierarchy in their cell, and there are about I think 50 cells in that Cook County Jail. So in Tier E1, the barn bosses are Joseph DiArgento and Sam Felici, who, as you'll recognize those names. They are ones who recorded tapes with John Shields from
Tom,
Sears.
you mean Martin Tajra and Sam Felici?
Yeah, did I say something else?
D'Argento.
Yeah. Sorry, Martin Tajra and Sam Felici. But then, it's kind of a slip that makes sense because Joseph DiArgento actually becomes one of the barn bosses alongside them. And that's because he admitted to them, based on their testimony, that he was involved in several murders and therefore is, qualified, if you will, to be one of these jail barn bosses. And so, um, yeah. So basically, have you ever killed anybody? And yeah, he admitted to that. And then later, when LaJoy joins him in jail, he also admits to several different murders. Not the least of which, of course, is the Golf Mill Sears and Terry Zilligan. Just gonna let Nancy in here. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think unless there's any thoughts on that, I'm sure we'll get kind of back into that. Um, at the same time that the unholy three, as they're later to referred to in court, which I just kind of like to call them that, because D'Argento, LaJoy, and Shang are in prison and awaiting, sentencing and awaiting their appeal for the Franklin Park bank robbery, which we covered a few months ago. They're still in jail for that, and the feds are kind of waiting to see if they'll use them. Um, Edward Hanrahan, the U.S. attorney, is really trying to make some big splashes and convictions in court, and that sort of where he starts is with Sam Giancana in this uh, grand jury, trying to get all the legal phrases straight, but in this grand jury, and eventually, you know, offers Giancana a deal to, for immunity, and then Giancana says, "Yeah, I'll take the immunity," but then he, pleads the fifth. So ends up also in the Cook County Jail with all of these other characters at the same time. So all these different people are in the Cook County Jail crossing over in the same tiers and interacting, etc. From LaJoy, D'Argento, Shang, Felici, Tajra, Painsco, Giancana. They're all sort of in jail in the same period of time, which I really found quite fascinating. But
It is. And does it ever sound like, the authorities take that into account in any kind of way when assigning them to jail?
you never know. I mean, it could go either way. It
Uh,
could you could be like, well, we're going to put him in with people he knows, and because that's just the way, maybe they worked it out behind the scenes. I
mhm.
don't really know, but I did find it fascinating that they were not separated.
Right.
So
And it's not just one time. It's like, it's a pattern.
yeah,
They have them all in there together. Yeah.
yeah, it's a really good question.
I mean,
And
there's so much corruption that you found within like law enforcement and certainly at the jail. I mean, the jail was all over the papers with how corrupt it was. So it makes sense to me that it might have been on purpose, that there might have been strings being pulled, looking like it's legitimate, but probably not.
yeah,
Well, that could be. I had never really heard of or known of the direct evidence between the daily machine and the mob with those payoffs that comes later in the text. But I mean, there's, just to your point, Peg, I mean, lots of little strings behind the scenes.
yeah.
Who plays Hanrahan in the movie? Is
Good
is
question.
it a Steve Carell?
Nobody we like.
Oh, it seems like it has to be a comic actor, a Steve Carell or a Will Ferrell.
Yeah,
It
it's
does. Yeah.
I'm sure he's in movies. I wonder who has cast him before. Um, I really thought that he was going to be in the movie that came out a few years ago about the Chicago Seven, but he wasn't.
Mm.
Uh, but I guess a spoiler alert, but Tom Foreign, who does take over for Hanrahan later in this text, or who eventually took over for him and led the prosecution in the that we'll cover in the fourth part, is portrayed in that movie, which was interesting. Um, so yeah, so really there's kind of this like legal political narrative that's paralleling all of this stuff that's happening in the jail at the same exact time. And Hanrahan is actually like hated for it. He like jumps the gun on all of this and really tries to make a big splash. And the people in Washington and the people in his own office are just like, what are you doing? You're just really not doing the right thing here. And I think, you know, it justice is probably moves a little bit too slow for somebody who was as ambitious as Ed Hanrahan. Um, another,
Well, Tom, let me pick up on that because I love that last sentence that you just said. I wrote in my notes, think about Hanrahan from the point of view of loyalty or omerta or any of that culture of, like if we see him as part of like our tribe, which literally he is, but to see the disloyalty and the like going out, rogue like that, how that looks, just to kind of like really look at him as somebody who understands from the inside, from the family view, the impact of Terry's murder, and still is doing all these things desperate that will allow his, you know, well, I just found it interesting to look at him, you know, as from the point of view of as an informer or a rat or disloyal from our point.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely the loyalties are that's a big variable on both sides of what we think is the good side and the bad side, and is something to watch too, because it doesn't it doesn't stop there. He is able to get his first witness, his first cooperating witness, or maybe that's not the right phrase. Lawyers, you can correct me anytime, but in Patrick Shang is the first, and he's allegedly again the part of the Sears holdup. Allegedly was not the primary driver, but threw out Loverboy Mendela when Mendela freaked out after they were in the getaway and took hold of the wheel. Also, allegedly, the person who broke up the gun that was used and scattered it around the West Side neighborhood where LaJoy's grocery store was. So he is the first to flip, as part of this sort of silver bullion robbery, and there was a robbery of cameras as well. Um, Regardless, there is this story here where, again, I reached out to the source of this story before. He actually doesn't even live in America, so that's pretty wild. It took me literally years to track down the source of this story. It was this guy on this gangsters forum that I found, and when you Google LaJoy, eventually you get like fifth page of Google, and you start seeing his name on some random forum. So I went in, I joined that forum in like 2019, found all this stuff, and then I started messaging the guy. I'm like, hey, really interested in this. Can we talk? Like, wanted to kind of understand where he got all these stories. And his name is Dushan. I only know that because eventually, after like I sent him direct messages over several years, I just kept trying. Um, and eventually I got an email one day and I was like, who is this? It was like this super Eastern European name. And he was like, hey, what's up? You like my work? Like, yeah, it's from all these different sources I pulled. Like, what do you want to know? Hey, we're actually friends now, but like it took me so long to get in touch with him. And he stands by his work. So this story that and I'm just not totally sure where he got it. I'm not sure he remembers at this point after he wrote it where it comes from, but Giancana bribing guards to intercept Shang's outgoing mail, and then in Shang's mail to his wife, it says that yeah, this guy Boscarino is a rat, which ends up leading to Boscarino's death, and then you know, I think that is also one of the murders that is admitted to later in jail. Or no, there's maybe I'm confused on that, but Boscarino dies, and he's right outside Willie Potatoes hangout in Melrose Park, so probably had something to do with that.
Jim,
Hey, Tommy. Hi, guys. When I was a copper in 1976, that's when Marilyn and I got married. And while we were on our honeymoon in, I think, June, Giancana was murdered in a park. He lived in a kind of a elaborate bungalow on Winona, I think, near Harlem and Roosevelt Road. And the Splatros were in there somewhere too. They were in Oak Park. Just interesting to me that, and I because I was gone during this murder, I kind of kicked myself because I always wanted to be in it on the action, and I just find it interesting that this guy who was, as you said, Tom, I had never heard this before, that he was willing to take be a conduit for what he knew to get us off a gentler outcome. That what was would be the outcome of that, even if it was withdrawn, that everybody thinks, oh, you're willing to give us up, that take care of you later. It's just one of those things that where my life just touched into something. I had no idea at the time that it had to do anything with Terry. Obviously it did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a strange kind of scene where he's on the stand and Hanrahan's like, okay, maybe I have him under enough pressure where if I give him an immunity deal, he'll flip and give me a Cardo. I think everybody really wanted a Cardo. Accardo never spent a day in jail his entire life, but really ran the mob from the passenger seat from the time Al Capone died until, you know, his own death. And so Giancana was way too loud of an operating boss for Accardo style. He really wanted the operating boss to be in the background. But again, as we just read, you know, the feds tried to subpoena his girlfriend, Phyllis McGuire. I mean, he was all over the place. He was dating around Hollywood, hanging out with Frank Sinatra. He was way too much in the public eye. And then I write Jim that, you know, just probably signifying that, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take the immunity deal, but then not doing anything with it, kind of, you know, reneging on it is like, you know, signifying that, yeah, we can't really trust this guy all the way because that code of omerta is really important.
Was that his plan all along? He was just jerking them around? Or I didn't see it in the text. Was he going to take the deal and changed his mind?
I don't think he would have ever taken the deal, but I don't know what he thought the strategy was going to be, because then they held him in contempt of court for taking a deal, but then pleading the fifth. And he languished there in purgatory until Hanrahan eventually, they were like, you can't keep him here any longer, like constitutionally or whatever it was. So
in Cook County,
yeah. So he did go in jail. It was kind of maybe an ingenious way to get out of that grand jury, but at the same time, I don't think he was that cunning. So I think it just worked out in his favor, even though he had to go to jail, maybe rather than commit perjury or something like that.
It goes without saying that they took away his immunity deal for that, right?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
They did. Because he was supposed to testify and then just never said anything. So yeah, Shang starts talking to Larry Morrissey, who's the head of the organized crime unit. His name will kind of pop up again as a player in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then Merle Hamry as well with the FBI. So they have one witness, and of course, him flipping leads to a lot of drama. Shang flipping leads to a lot of drama in the Sears case, because if what allegedly is said to have happened, Shang can be an informant on LaJoy and D'Argento, who are not yet witnesses in the Sears case. So D'Argento and LaJoy start worrying that because he's an informant, he'll spill the beans on them for the Zilligan murder. And
he may have the gun.
One more time, Ma?
He may have the gun.
He very well could have the gun. Allegedly, the story was that like he broke it up on the floor and then scattered it, but he very well
but
could.
Nobody saw him scatter it. And I think in some other part of your manuscript, you raised this as a fear in the minds of the other two, that he may have that and it's got their prints on it or whatever.
But then later they do dig up the gun pieces, but then it doesn't match.
Close. They don't dig up the gun pieces. I really wish they did find those gun pieces, and I don't even want to go down that path because there's a chance that that gun is still somewhere in that general area. But they dug out bullets, actually, slug bullets from a basement of the food mart. And that is kind of a whole other kind of Kane initiated investigation where, 4 years after the Golf Mill Sears robbery murder, there's some movement on the case. So
What was was there some gun that or pieces of gun that they were looking in the sewers for?
yes, that was the same gun. Allegedly the murder weapon March 14th. And so allegedly that was broken up, and he told them that he put them in sewers and in different receptacles around that area. And so that seems like a pretty detailed account to me of something that happened, like, and not necessarily something you can make up out of thin air and have that be the story. So that, I think, is what happened. Then again, in the end, none of these three witnesses bring up the murder to the feds. And we know it's talked about with the feds, at least with LaJoy and the feds, but we don't know how much the feds were, giving credence to this story, because a lot of it was coming from, you could see Richard Kane's tentacles on this kind of story, in one way or the other.
How do we think that Kane got such specific information about it? Like, obviously, I know he was like probably wiretapping the mob and, listening in, and, he had contacts in the mob, obviously. But like, do you have a theory of like who exactly told him about all those details? And because like he knew about the gun pieces, and I don't
No,
know.
no, I don't. There's, if that were, written down somewhere, it would really be hard to find, if impossible. I think I think the kind of reason that I wrote so much about Kane's upbringing and kind of his rise to power in this manuscript is to show that he is so privy to in all kinds of information. He's the conduit with the mob. He's a made man. He was a made man in the Chicago outfit. And he was, for a time, head of the Special Investigations Unit in the Cook County Sheriff's Office, while he was a made man. So if he didn't know that information, I'm not sure who did. So I think he's a very, very good source on that. And then when it's time to save his own skin, he uses that information, because he sees, not to get like too ahead of ourselves, he sees these three witnesses that are going to testify against him, and he knows their checkered past and is trying to stain their credibility on the stand.
He's
And
just
then
such
there was the
character.
lie detector test that he did, right? Like, I wonder if they've got
Maybe
information that way, but I'm assuming we don't have any transcripts of what was
Right.
said at those tests.
No, yeah, and those were not actually official lie detector tests.
Right.
Kane is the one who owned that lie detector test,
Yeah.
that machine privately, and then had his own company. And that sort of is that lie detector test is the basis of the trial that's coming up in part 4, that lie detector test in that motel room in 1963, almost 5 years later. It's the subject of, and the main, issue at hand in the federal trial against Dodano and Kane and the DeLeggies and a few others. Any other like clarifying questions? I know there's just there's a lot here.
Quick question. So LaJoy and D'Argento, they're already in prison, and the whole point is that they're going to be testifying in order to be protected. Like they're turning in order to be protected against retaliation from the mob or from other prisoners?
Not at this point in time. So Shang is the
Okay.
first to become a witness, and they are in the Cook County jail while he's a witness, and they're like, "We got to kill this guy." Allegedly, we got to kill this guy.
Because
The
because he might rat about them being part of the murder at
yeah.
Cedars. But like how
He
so
was part of it too, Tara. Yeah, Shang was a part of it.
I guess where I'm confused is like if they're already in prison and I can't remember what they're in prison for, but like what does them being implicated in one more murder, like how does that make them like not credible witnesses if they're already considered criminals?
So
Well,
I
'cause that would make them like lifers, right? Like they're not in jail for life yet, are they?
no,
Or
so
maybe-
they're not in jail for life at this point. This is I believe late 1966 is when Shang or 67 is when he becomes a witness. And so later they will join him as a fellow witness, but there's this time where he's the only government witness willing to talk about the Franklin Park bank robbery, which is what they're in jail for.
Right.
That
Okay.
case has already gone through um, the district and
Prosecution.
appellate court, but there's the cover up of the robbery, which becomes and other robberies that becomes the charges against people higher up in the outfit, which is kind of crazy to think about. They're already in jail for this crime that they committed. They held up the bank themselves, but they're somehow going to get an immunity deal later for telling on people who were trying to find the rat of that robbery. And that is Dodano and Kane and others as well. Does that kind of add up?
Yeah, is the idea that like if there's other crimes that they have not been prosecuted for, especially like the murder of Terry, obviously, that they're not considered credible witnesses because they have a motive to lie in the trial against Kane? Is that the idea?
So there's a
Like
couple there's
they're
a
there
couple
for
reasons. Yeah, there's a couple reasons that a murder charge would complicate their witness protection later. One is that murder charges are state charges. And so you'd have a whole other and government entity having to come in and potentially blow up a federal immunity deal. The deal that they make is with the feds, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office on federal charges. Most bank robbery cases are federal cases. The lawyers in here can correct me on that, but they're federal cases because the money is guaranteed by the Federal Reserve, and so that's a federal case. Once you throw in a murder charge in there, that witness becomes a lot more difficult to work with, and is certainly that can be something that stains their credibility in the eyes of the jury. That's not to get like too ahead of ourselves. That's what's happening in the trial later. The defendants are trying to throw all of these bombs against the witnesses that are testifying against them and saying these guys are dirty, they're murderers. And it's a little frustrating how things kind of occur at the trial in the courtroom, but it's right there in the testimony. And so it's kind of fascinating to watch unfold.
basically if they're robbers, they're credible, but if they're murderers, forget about it.
I know. I know it's totally
Can't
crazy.
trust them now.
It's totally crazy. And I think there's probably, I don't know if any of the attorneys would know, but like I think if there's like an ongoing investigation, maybe you can't testify in some way, but I think that's brought up and entered in as a motion by one of the defense attorneys that, hey, if LaJoy is being looked at as a murder suspect, he can't
Can't.
testify. So that's brought up at some point. There's some kind of legal wrinkle there too. So they're playing to both
Mhm.
things.
Fascinating.
And so before they become witnesses, DiArgento is in jail, in Cook County Jail first, with Shang. And I think we've at this point introduced Chaplain Irwin, who runs the PACE program. He's the chaplain of the jail. He runs kind of a work program for the inmates. and he's got this chapel in the basement, and D'Argento wants that to be the place where he lures Shang down to talk and kill him, or have someone else kill him, using this shank that he finds, kind of a sharp object. Then he throws his arm out, playing sports in the yard, has a cast, and then tucks the shank in there, and is kind of walking around like he's got all this power, because he's, basically got a weapon. Um, so uh, then Shang, is alerted to that, and then he never leaves his cell again after he's alerted to the fact that they're going to try to kill him in the chapel. And then I have just a couple notes here from some of these sources are from declassified FBI files. The price on Shang's head when he becomes an informant, it was never actually specified. No one ever said, hey, there's an informant who said, yeah, there's a price on his head, but it's kind of implied that you'll get paid back if you kill Shang. But that's not necessarily D'Argento's interest in killing Shang. He wants, allegedly wants, to be protected for his part in the Sears robbery murder. But a number of mob figures reportedly stated that they would do anything possible to locate Shang and kill him. There is no contract let out as such. Informant said, however, that it is understood by all members of the criminal outfit that there is a good price on Shang's head, and that anyone able to do anything about Shang's demise would be well rewarded, and that there is no doubt that efforts are being made by any number of individuals on their own and collectively to find Shang and kill him. FBI recording number 124. And then there's also, I think this is in the same chapter. Oh, this is in the next chapter, but another note I have here is when they come after Accardo next, the case that sort of leads to a grand jury is actually about a boxing match. And that boxing match is between Ernie Terrell and Muhammad Ali at Soldier Field in Chicago. So the Mafia wanted the fight to be in New York, and then but the outfit wanted it to be in Chicago. So that kind of led to this other grand jury in which Accardo is, potentially going to be taken down, but does not. Again, Hanrahan loses, taking down another key figure of the mob, and just, is continuing to take L's, as they say, in the courtroom. Olivia liked that one. Awesome. So, and then in this same case too, it's clear, as Mom, you were referring to earlier, that Hanrahan will not go after Daly. When they start talking about Daly, Hanrahan will not go after him. And then Giancana ends up going to Mexico with none other than Richard Kane. So they once he gets out, and Terrell, to your point that, or sorry, Baki, wrong brother, to your point that, if he was going to signify that he was going to talk, it was pretty much the end of his run as operating boss. So he went to Mexico, and Kane joined him. Again, just being more Richard Kane stuff, just following down there, Kane's contacts in Mexico, Giancana's reputation. They began a gambling empire in the Caribbean, and wanted to build a casino in Iran, bribed the Shah of Iran to allow it. All kinds of fun things like that.
So is this Giancana sort of just going rogue? Was he kind of violating mob rules by kind of running his own thing, but not paying any kind of tax or anything? Or is that just
100%? Yes. So he's doing all these lavish things south of the border, and is not paying the street tax, which is so important to the outfit, is to pay that street tax. And so even though they're like, we're not even in the same country, Accardo sits Kane down himself, and when he's currying for Giancana and back in Chicago, he says, let him know that he's still got to pay his dues. And I think that was understood, but at the end of the day, it was just for Giancana. It was the end of the run. Even if, as Jim said, it ends for him in 76. He had already peaked in his criminal career. So Hanrahan's down. All this is included to show that Hanrahan's down. He missed Giancana, he missed Accardo. Okay, well, who else is there left to get? So he turns his focus to, so he's got Shang already. He turns his focus to LaJoy and D'Argento, and signs the I don't know, whatever this is called. But you can see the date on it, October 66, here where it says filed. So kind of the timing is lines up that this is now what his main focus is.
The feeling I get is almost like if a drone was going over the Chicago area and it starts to zoom in on the neighborhood where we grew up in River Forest. Accardo lives maybe a half a mile from where we were. He owned a square block of River Forest. In 8th grade, my friend Tommy Lesher and I went up. It was the first time we'd ever seen the gates open, and we were just playing. And we went up and pretended to be on a scavenger hunt. And we had made up a quick little list in our idea before we rang the bell. And Mrs. Accardo answered the door. She invited us in, gave us lemonade while she hunted for some like 1926 pennies or something like that. And it was, and then, just the stuff that I had learned previously about like that bank robbery and that robbery at the Colonial Motel and the foot chases, and how they went through the Thatcher Woods, where all 5 of us, of the boys in my family, played all the time, and they're arrested at like Park Avenue and stuff, 2 blocks away from our street. It just seems like it's such a different feeling that this poison or this milieu is there all the time, and it's just growing, and it's going to seek somebody out that's also in the neighborhood. You're there, you're going to get affected, even though you have no idea what the hell's going on around you until some kind of a tragic thing happens. It's kind of like should be kind of a warning to all of us, is not to tolerate that crap in any part of your life. If you can put your weight on the scale and get the stuff eradicated as continually and often as you can. It's going to get you some way, if it's not going to get you directly some other way. The Splatros were killed, and they were Oak Parkers as well. They were found in a cornfield, I think, in Indiana. And the way they killed Giancana, from what I understood after I got back from the honeymoon, was that there was an FBI agent in a car keeping an eye on Giancana's house for some reason. And a car went by him at like 100 miles an hour. And although he had no jurisdiction really, or anything, it just ticked him off. And he sped off after it. And by the time came back, the murder had occurred. Oh. So that drew them away from the house. Wow. It's just a lot of little stuff, but it's so, if you take that high resolution picture of the neighborhood and just start to zoom down, boy, it's right all around you all the time. It's just it's like if it was a movie, that's probably the way to begin it. You'd like dot all these little places on the map, and they're not very far apart. Just as an offside.
No, it's Jim. Thanks for that that's really great, like just context. And if I could even add to that is Giancana lived in Oak Park when he was killed. He was making sausage and peppers in his basement. They shot
Yeah.
him. When he was killed, the killer threw the murder weapon in Thatcher Woods in River Forest. So it's just constant.
Yeah.
You know, Uncle Jim, I was kind of felt the same way reading this, like the whole, like two parallel universes, right? Like
Yeah.
there are the people who are living their good life, and then there's this super dirty underbelly that's right there, right
Mhm.
under everything you're doing. It's so
Right.
strange. And then just learning more about this, like I wish I would have known all of this before I became a prosecutor. Like I'm going back in my mind and seeing how things worked and the attitudes and relationships, and I'm just like, wow, maybe this explains some of what I thought was crazy, but didn't know the backstory like it is. And I mean, just really the corruption and the egos, right? Everyone just seems to be in it for themselves
Yeah.
on both sides. Crazy. So yeah, to the extent you can do the good, like you said, Uncle Jim, it's invasive.
Yeah. It's all around us all the time. We just don't, unless you're wised up, you just don't see it,
Yeah,
until it bites you.
yeah.
Can I ask a question, Tom?
Yeah.
What, besides being the US attorney, what was Ed Hanrahan's motive for like being so thirsty to prosecute the mob? Was he running for something else after, or like, or
Great.
he just, that's just what he wanted his legacy to be, or?
No, he wanted to go up and up and up. I think, eventually like he wanted to be, senator probably. And Daley probably wanted him to be a senator too. And so if you have kind of this track record of bringing down the mob, then, you can, really use that. Again, politics is all about name identification too. So if you're out there in the news and the headlines as Hanrahan brings down, a Cardo, then you've got a lot of runway to run for higher office. Now, that is a question very keen for the end of this part, being running up to part 4, because Hanrahan announces at the end of 1967 that he is going to run for Cook County State's Attorney. And so that's a bigger office. It's even bigger than the state's attorney's office because he's got his own staff, et cetera, and he's elected to that position. U.S. Attorney is an appointed position. He was appointed by President Johnson to that position, but getting elected to Cook County State's Attorney, it holds a lot. I would say it's a bigger office, right, Peggy? Right, Jim? It's a bigger office. It's seen as a bigger opportunity or position.
I think in my mind, the feds are the bigger office because
Yeah.
it's a federal, position. But he would certainly have more power as the Cook County State's Attorney because he is the Cook County State's Attorney, right? As opposed to being appointed, like you said, right? And this Cook County State's Attorney is, I think, second in the nation. I think maybe Los Angeles is, or New York. I can't remember which one it is bigger than us. So, I mean, it was a big prosecutor's office to be in charge of. And I think he's got so much pull in Chicago, right, with Daley. So his power would have been bigger in Chicago than it would be on the US level. He's just another player there.
That's good. That's great clarification. Yeah. And I'm sure, Daley wants to control what's going on in Cook County as opposed to like what the feds are doing in Chicago. He doesn't have as much control over that. And so I think being, part of that machine, a Hanrahan they would value that a little bit higher, but it's not necessarily like a better position. I don't know how much it pays, or paid back then either, but it's certainly something that is desired, and eventually he does run for this, so of course he runs, he announces that he's going to run, and so he brought the indictments, but he's not going to be the one prosecuting the case. So quite possibly as well that he thought, all right, well, I'll get out of the U.S. Attorney's office where I bungled these major cases. I'll run for Cook County State's Attorney and maybe get some credit for bringing the indictments during my run for Cook County State's Attorney. So you can kind of see it line up there, and so we'll get into the trial a little bit more, but I hope that's an answer to your question, Kai. Great. This chapter in the jail, all about, I think we've talked about the jail at length here, but this all comes from the recorded interview John Shields did with Martin Tajra. It explains not only that what was explained to them about the Sears murder, but other murders while they were in jail. And again, using these stories as a way to gain status in the jail, and to be barn bosses was kind of their motive. And so it's not just, hey, we were telling stories. That there's like this purpose behind them telling all of these stories, and some of them are pretty gruesome. The other key piece of information here is that in the interview, Martin Tajra explains, and he explains it in a way that's like pretty off the cuff. Like if you listen to it, I think I've assigned that before, but if you didn't, that's fine. But he explains it in a way that's like pretty off the cuff, that he LaJoy was actually shot in the leg by a fellow criminal because LaJoy tried to rip him off after a bank robbery. There was an $85,000 spoil in a bank robbery in Oak Park. And, after that, LaJoy tried to steal a big chunk off of him, went in his garage and tried to take a big piece of the money. And then to teach him a lesson, they shot him in the leg. And he, as Tyler said, walked with a gimp. And when they would play ball in the jail yard, sometimes he would like sit out because his leg was bothering him. And so it gives another potential perpetrator a gimp, which is a major reason why Paul Painsko was looked at for the Sears murder, was because the shooter allegedly walked with a limp. And so now we have evidence that somebody else who could have been the perpetrator has a limp as well. And then
that last line gave me goosebumps with this chapter. It's really well written. The last line of just that one sentence. As a result, LaJoy walked with a gimp. The murder of Terry Zilligan did too. Very well written.
Well, thanks for the compliment. And yeah, it's very eerie to think.
Yeah, it's scary. Mm-hmm.
So then, of course, too, I did a lot of research on the witness protection program as well in writing this. And the witness protection program, like I would have thought that it went back like a long, long time. It really was. It really started with giving informants this network of safe houses for them to stay in. And then eventually the architect of the program, Gerald Schur, which I'm grateful to my mom for putting me on him, because when he passed away, you gave me the obituary in like 2019 or something like that. So really kind of spearheaded my looking into him. And he was really the architect and said, we really need a program at the federal level in which people can inform, and then we can give them not just safe houses, but entirely new identities and places to live. Now, the program is called, the acronym is WITSEC. So I refer to that WITSEC. It's the Witness Protection Program. And it really kicks off in 1967. The timing is, pretty crazy. I'm sure, spoiler alert, obviously, LaJoy, Shang, DiArgento, they end up in witness protection. They fall off the face of the earth in 1969. I'm sure they were like, some of the first, dozen or so informants too. That really is kind of difficult thing to think about, that they were just like, that if this had waited till the 70s, it maybe, they wouldn't have had that same protection, or something could have happened. But they really wanted to fight against the code of omerta, which is just such a huge variable in all of these different different occurrences, instances, etc. So with that in mind, Hanrahan's number one motive now is to flip also D'Argento and later LaJoy. This dialogue comes from what D'Argento said happened, and that's covered in the trial transcripts later. So they ask him, "When did you flip? When did Mr. Hanrahan visit you to flip?" He says, "Yeah, he came to me. I said I didn't want to see him. I don't want to see him," and he denied Hanrahan and his agents, several times before, until finally he goes to Leavenworth, and that place is so terrible that he does eventually flip. This is
He
something
didn't just go to Leavenworth. He manipulated and schemed his way into Leavenworth.
yeah.
Then
He
he's
even
like,
wrote a letter.
"Oh shit!" This
Yeah, he
Let's
wanted
talk
to get
about
out.
about this letter. There's no way he wrote this letter.
right.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's what I thought. I was like, there's an attorney behind that.
no
He
way.
did not. It was too eloquent.
Yeah. He uses the word adamant. Now, I thought maybe it was the priest, Father Irwin, or somebody like that.
Will you expedite my shipment to a federal penal institution?
Thank
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And he's
Wow.
just writing the president directly because no one else will, respond to him. And relief for his present quandary is another one. And so yeah, they're really, as you could tell, they're keeping him in county because they have use for him. They think they have use for him. And they want to have, some local access to D'Argento then. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. See here. Actually, Painsco also warns D'Argento that an attack on his life is coming, which I found very, very interesting. And there were 3 different attempts on D'Argento's life, and he survived. And so Hanrahan goes to, and so just for protecting him, they put him in the hole. They put him in solitary confinement. And so Hanrahan and Morrissey go visit him while he's at his most desolate and say, "Don't you want to rehabilitate yourself?" As they probably did not say it that way when they were in Leavenworth. But of course, when D'Argento's on the stand, he's saying, that's what they asked me. Do you want to rehabilitate yourself? How nice of them. Wow. But you know, kind of helped Firm was really, really having more psychiatric issues, even more than he had in Cook County. And then D'Argento, a common theme with a lot of these informants is I want to do it for my family. This is for my family, protecting my family, etc. The government accepted his terms, $100 here, $100 there in the following weeks and months, and then was transferred back to Illinois. Was transferred around different jails while they kind of awaited building their case. And actually he was in DuPage County somewhere as well, and kind of was awaiting, his next orders from the government and eventually a new life. And same for LaJoy as well. So actually the same day that D'Argento left Leavenworth, LaJoy was transferred into Leavenworth. So timing, a little interesting, we'll say. Then his family drove out to spend Thanksgiving with him, and one of the FBI agents, Tom Green, drove out at the same time and was like, Stanley's right there. He's obviously feeling a lot of emotion, so they're capitalizing on that and trying to really get to him and help yourself get out of the darkness. Then he, so he denies that when he's in Leavenworth, and then a writ of habeas corpus was issued to LaJoy. Lawyers want to say what a habeas corpus is, please. I will not describe that well.
I'm gonna look it up.
Something
trying
like,
Bring a body.
oh, sorry, Jim, I can't hear you.
Oh, I was just speculating. I think I know what it is, but I'm not positive. But it has to do with bringing a body, the habeas corpus, the corpus, I think, into the courtroom or into the system in person. Bring
Yeah.
a person in.
So bringing him, like, if there's things being said about him, he should be there, or be
Right.
ready to testify. So he was. There. He pleaded the fifth during this grand jury that he traveled all the way from Kansas to be part of. The marshals get him, and they take him away, and then Hanrahan approaches him outside of the courtroom and says, Mike, you could help yourself. We could help you do that. And then so it denies him, and then actually doubles back and says, wait, no, let me talk to that guy, because I think he realizes that was probably the last opportunity that he could start a new life. So then LaJoy is taken to Hanrahan's office by the marshals, and it starts from there. He does not mention the Golf Mill Sears incident at all. And so Hanrahan gets another witness, but more to come on what happens with when they find out that he may have been part of a murderer. I just noticed that it went to noon, and I don't know how that happened. But so and we're like maybe halfway through this part, so I'll just kind of, are we halfway, or did it only go to 44? Sorry, no, it's a 54. So defer to everyone else. Do you just want to drop and meet another time, or are we good here?
I'll drop off like in the next 15 or 20 minutes if we keep going. It's up to you guys.
I'm in the same position Terrell is.
Okay. I'll
Me
try
too.
to, okay, I'll try to just kind of run through like my notes and see if we can wrap up in 15 minutes. So the indictments eventually do come down on December of 1967, and that is for the 1968 trial. They indict Richard Kane under the name Scalzetti to kind of make him more of like a mob guy, which is his birth name, or it's really like his mother's maiden name, Scalzetti. So they decide to put that in the indictment. And as we'll remember, and as we kind of continue, that Richard Ogilvie is going to become the nominee for governor in 1968 for the Republican Party. And so all of that political aspect should really not be understated when it comes to this indictment, because Richard Kane was hired by Richard Ogilvie in the sheriff's office. Huge blunder, maybe one of Ogilvie's only blunders that he ever made as a politician or a public servant, was hiring Kane. Whether that was a blunder, again, maybe it was something he intentionally did to get elected. We don't necessarily know, but certainly a huge thorn politically in his side. And speaking of Kane, in the classic Kane fashion, instead of hiring a lawyer when the indictment comes down on him, he hires a PR guy, and then he represents himself as an attorney. So just a very, interesting decision there that maybe only Richard Kane would do. And another aspect that was very interesting, a tie-in from Ogilvy, was that I found that he was really helpful, instrumental in bringing the PACE program to the Cook County Jail in his time on the Cook County Board. And so that PACE program was, something that obviously Felici and Tajra and D'Argento for a time participated in under Chaplain Irwin's watch. This chapter really gets a lot into John Irwin. Somebody actually wrote a book on John Irwin. I'm very, very lucky about that, called The Man Who Keeps Going to Jail. So have a lot of information about him. Didn't make up this stuff about what it says in his office. That's all true. And just a really, really interesting guy in his own right. One other connection to the PACE program that's very fascinating is that it's partially funded by Sears Roebuck and Company. And so they made some major contributions to that program, and even hired out inmates to be TV repairmen. So just thinking about the correlation between Terry Zilligan, TV salesman, this random jail program, hiring TV repairmen is, just one of those things that made me just drop my book and just like, what the hell? So you've got all of that going on. There's not really anything, there's nothing malicious about all of those connections, but I think it's really just one of those things that, but I will say the connection to Sears that John Irwin had, I think eventually leads to his connection to John Shields. He invites him to the jail to come and talk to the inmates. And so there is that connection there. We talked about Hanrahan stepping down shortly after the indictments, and Tom Foran becoming Tom Foran. I'll probably say that interchangeably. I don't know exactly the Tom Foran becomes the new U.S. attorney and the prosecutor of the 1968 trial. And kind of curious what the lawyer's opinion is on this whole system that the federal judges would nominate basically, or choose who was going to become the next U.S. attorney, and tell the mayor, here's our pick. And then the mayor would bring that to the president, confirm that. And then the confirmed new U.S. attorney would be hearing cases in front of the same judges that nominated him.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I agree with you. But
Does that still happen? Does that still,
you know what? I don't know. I'm gonna look that up though, because I thought that was super interesting. I was like, wow, that's how they get picked? Because I've never really done much work on the federal level, but I'm like, man, it wouldn't surprise me if it's still that way.
Crazy, totally crazy. Yeah, just really found that to be something. So let me check the time. All right, I just got a couple more minutes, and if you guys want, if anything else jumped out during the rest of the reading, I'll just kind of leave it there. But a lot going on. A lot going on in this section. So back to kind of the initiation by Kane. So Kane knows that LaJoy and his family used to target shoot in the basement of their grocery store, and therefore there are probably some casings down there that could match the gun in the 1964 murder of Terry. Triggers an investigation, and they go and they collect samples of those slugs, they call them, or maybe they're kind of like fake bullets. But it comes out that hope to solve the 1968 murder finally comes out here. This is a clipping that I found several years ago. Nothing becomes of it, but Richard Kane is the initiator. He is the initiator of this whole thing. He writes to Sears and says, hey, I'm claiming the reward for information related to the murder of Terry Zilligan, and here's where you can find the bullets. And so Sears takes that to the police. The police go and search and find the bullets and then test them against the bullet in Terry's body, and then nothing really becomes of it. However, J. Edgar Hoover himself is apprised of this because they write a memo to Hoover and say, look, we've got these informants. Sure, you might read that they are under investigation for murder, but it's all good. Nothing will happen from this. Then they go on the other side and they ask LaJoy, sir, you didn't tell us about this murder. And he was like, it's nothing. I got picked up. No, there's nothing to worry about. I was not involved. And they kind of just leave it there. So like nothing happens or is said to happen about the analysis of the bullets. And then the feds are just kind of like hands off. They don't investigate murders. So our witness, we're not going to get into that too much. Morally, is that the right thing? No. But they have, again, all these like political and legal reasons to not look too into their informant, and they probably did, but essentially, yeah, this is the dialogue here. Hoover is apprised again, and then this is where all that comes from, is released FBI file. And then Jim, was the family notified of this at all? Like, do you remember any of that in 1968?
I don't, Tom. No, I don't think we were.
Yeah. Didn't seem to be the case either. It just seemed like just this thing happened. And then Peanuts is the first person that LaJoy and D'Argento put away. And so that's something there. And then, of course, these chapters cover John Shields' visits to the jail to create those recordings. It also covers a visit by Kane that Kane makes to Painsco when Painsco is probably there on a habeas corpus writ in Chicago, and Kane goes to visit him and says, hey, like, can you come clean about LaJoy and D'Argento and, be a witness against them? And Painsco, in some way or another, declines that. One other thing I think I've talked about, my interview with Dick English, who was kind of hired to break up the barn boss system in Cook County Jail, a real badass guy. He told me that, when I told him about John Shields bringing in a tape recorder into the jail, how would that go about? And he was immediately like, that would not happen. We were very strict with security. You had to leave things behind. Only with the approval of the warden would you be able to bring in a tape recorder into the jail. And so the warden himself approved this interview to take place. The warden, Winston Moore, who was a former child psychologist, I think is, and as Dick said himself, very qualified to tell if people were bullshitting him or not. And so sort of taking these guys at their word, believing Felicia and Tajra enough to have Shields come in and record them, I think is pretty telling as well. And then again, LaJoy and D'Argento put Peanuts away, and finally some familial reflections in that last chapter of this section. Kane going to meet with his prosecutor in full disguise and trying to make a deal that they kind of laugh at is just classic Richard Kane. And then Mike LaJoy's public defender, goes by the name of Kaufman, is actually, and this is in a footnote, but my dad followed Kaufman in the Attorney General's office as the chief of consumer fraud. So
Kaufman was one of Michael's mentors.
Yeah, Dad said he thought he was such an asshole.
Well, he used to always go to his birthday parties and
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's LaJoy's public defender.
yeah, that they dropped my book today. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, anything, any clarifications before we set up the next meeting, talk about the trial? Sorry for talking so much and going over time, but any
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
Any-
Tom, it was great. Don't worry. It was really informational.
So what I was thinking then, because I know everyone's got to run, but for the next meeting, we might meet on July 7th. I just thought that date might work. I don't know if anybody has objections to that date. Same time, but we cover the first 10 chapters of the trial.
The only thing is that's July 4th weekend, so you might have, some people might not be able to be as free. I mean, I can do it, but just to put it out there.
Okay, we could do the following Sunday as well. There's no worries with that. So maybe the 14th is July 14th better. All right, we'll do the 14th. Thank you for that. The trial is just sometimes it's too much to handle. Just to be prepared. Hanrahan and his team are obviously out for blood, and then also literally before the trial even starts, there is blood spilled in the courtroom. I mean, this thing is insane. You know, there's actually the defendants tries to kill himself in a pretrial proceeding right there.
Oh,
So this trial is insane. The first 10 chapters cover LaJoy and D'Argento's testimony. So it's a very they gets into it right away. Julius Hoffman is the presiding judge, which is another reason it's just absolutely bonkers, this trial. And Sears is brought up a multitude of times, but Hoffman can
Doesn't know what's going on.
sequesters the jury over and over again when they're talking about that. So it's 32 pages, chapters 54 to 64, but they're quick chapters. So we'll meet in the middle of July to start talking about it, and then we'll go from there. Use the text chain if you have any questions. We got lawyers in there, so that's great. I feel so cool when I'm just like, hey, lawyers, you know. So thanks, Peggy.
I looked up the habeas corpus, and Uncle Jim, you're right. It's a Latin term that means that of the body. So, but it's to bring someone back to court to make sure they're being jailed properly, right? That they're being detained for good reason and legally. So, that's the writ he was coming back for. So that's interesting. He had been in jail a really long time.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks to everybody for just being part of this as usual. Eternally grateful to each of you and indebted to each of you. Thanks for participating and engaging. I'll send an email out with part 4 now and just that date. And until then, just have a great start to your summer, everybody. Love to all.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Amazing work.
Your grandfather would be so proud of you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Tom.
Take
Love
care.
you all.
Bye,
Great work.
everybody.
Bye,
Love
Mosey.
you.
Great book club.
Love.
Bye, bye, T-Bone.
Bye, Yuka.
A little more.
Hi. What if Tom's ending it now?
Oh,
Really well. I've been printing it out at school, so it's.
Oh no, you just admitted that on a recording.
Oh, no. It's fine.
I printed out at work too. Yeah.
Love you,
Thanks,
Nancy and Jim.
Love you guys.
All right, bye, babies.
See you later, Mom. See you, Jim.